Great Scott. Great Scott. Great Scott.
Hello everyone and welcome to another fabulous episode of Great Scott. I'm Scotty V. Thanks for watching. It's good to see you. Today I want to speak about 5 reasons I believe we might be in for some trouble on the Man of Steel sequel. Yes, that's right. There have been a lot of announcements as of late that have gotten me thinking, gotten me concerned, gotten me worried about our Man of Steel sequel and whether or not we're even going to get one and how it might be changed from the vision that we might have all thought might be coming up in a sequel. Most of us who were fans, in one way or another, of Man of Steel, were looking forward to seeing a sequel, wanted to see more of that universe, wanted to see it continue. We wanted to have a lot of our questions answered. We wanted to find out what happened now that Superman has been introduced to the world. Today I have 5 reasons for you why I am very concerned that things might be very different from what we could have hoped for. The first reason is, a few years ago when Snyder was at San Diego Comic-Con, he was asked who would win in a fight between his Superman that was coming up for Man of Steel and the Nolan Batman. And Snyder kind of laughed and kind of shooed away the idea and said, listen, I love Nolan. Nolan's a great filmmaker. He's a genius. I love Batman as a character. I love comic book characters in general. I love the Nolan franchise. But Superman versus Batman is just a silly question. I mean, they're not in the same realm. They're not in the same category. They can't really fight each other. And of course, if they did, Superman would win. And he said that because, for a number of reasons. It's kind of a logical answer, whether or not you're a fan of Batman more than you are of Superman. If you're logical, and if you think about it, it makes no sense that Batman, a guy in a suit with a cool car, could ever stand up against Superman in a physical manner. Yes, you could say, well, what if he had kryptonite? Well, what if he had kryptonite? It was the first time ever, and he surprised Superman, and there wasn't a way he could get away before the kryptonite started to affect him. It's not immediate, and his powers don't vanish. They make him weaker and weaker over time. It's been shown on many occasions that when he sees it, he can speed away or move away and then fight from a distance or come back later with a different idea. But Snyder has kind of made it clear to me over many press conferences, many things that I have read, that he's not really happy with having his hand forced. And by that I mean at San Diego Comic-Con this past summer, 2013, it was announced that Batman would be included in the new Man of Steel sequel. What Snyder said was, we are making another Man of Steel movie. Yay! Everybody cheered. I poured through comic books and DC archives to try to come up with the best way to tell you what we're going for in the next film, and this is what I came up with. And they brought up Harry Lennox, and he read a quote from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, where Batman has Superman down and has his hands at Superman's throat, and it looks like Batman has defeated the Man of Steel. And this again met applause, hey! Because The Dark Knight Returns is a revered book, even though I have said on many occasions that Frank Miller's clearly not a Superman fan, may even hate Superman, and certainly, at the very least, doesn't understand him at all as a character. It was clear that he mainly just wanted to use Superman as a villain of sorts, but he was a pseudo-villain. He wasn't a villain because it was, ha ha ha, I'm evil and I want to kill everyone. He was a villain because he was working for a Reagan-esque era politic in America, but in the future, and they certainly made overtures to political views, and Frank Miller was not a fan of what was going on, and basically he just wanted to use Superman in that regard, and by doing so he made Superman look like a complete dolt, an idiot, somebody that maybe could have Batman get the jump on him, and many non-fans of Superman seem to believe that Superman is just a dumb brute and is kind of a dick because he shows off his powers, but can be taken down very easily by someone who's a little smarter, and none of that could be further from the truth. All of that is just completely wrong. Superman is highly intelligent, is worldly, has traveled all over, knows lots of things, knows languages, has read many things, and is a detective in his own right. I understand what Batman's power is, and that is that he's a great detective. He's very smart. He's inventive. He can use his money to make him a better superhero, but that doesn't mean that Superman can't also do things and probably can't outdo Batman in many, many ways. But Batman Returns was the book that many fans and comic book purists looked at as the book that brought Batman back to his roots, and by that I mean In the 60s and 70s, he was kind of goofy because of the TV show. The comics kind of took on that lighthearted tone. It was fun. It was goofy. But it wasn't gritty, dark, violent, fighting Batman that the fans had remembered from Batman's roots. And that book brought him back to that. But at the same time, it kind of made Superman look really bad. And a lot of people who are fans of Batman only know Superman from that book and believe that that's who he is. And that was one take. That was one alternate vision. That was one political statement that happened to have superhero characters involved that one writer wanted to make. And it did make Batman very cool and very gritty, and that's probably the Batman most people would want to see, but at the same time it slighted Superman and it hurt him. Unfortunately, though, and it looks more and more these days like it was the studio that put him up to it, Snyder used that as his announcement that Batman would be in the Man of Steel sequel, and it got everybody in a fervor that the new Man of Steel movie would actually be a Batman versus Superman movie, and many fans got the idea that that meant that Batman at some point would be getting the better of Superman in a physical confrontation, and so the question came up again, and people started asking him, but using his own words against him, why all of a sudden are you going to have Batman beat up Superman in a movie when you said before Man of Steel came out that Batman couldn't possibly be in a fight against Superman? And why are you abandoning your vision? And why are you suddenly going to be a Batman fan and make a Batman movie that happens to have Superman in it when you were supposed to be such a big fan of Superman and made this Man of Steel? And in defense, he has to come out and say something. And what he said, though I'm not quoting, was basically, listen, I meant what I said. I still meant what I said. I love what we did with Man of Steel, and I'm not really happy that the studio is kind of forcing my hand. What he actually said, and what I think he meant, that what I just said was, listen, I work for the studio, and at the end of the day, what the studio wants is what I have to do, and this is what they want, so this is what I'm doing. And even then, because I believe Snyder wasn't happy based on his comments, Snyder wasn't happy that his vision was getting changed. Snyder wasn't happy that what he had done in Man of Steel was seemingly going to be either erased or radically altered to make it look like Superman was a villain or somehow there was a Batman, even though it was already said by the creators of Man of Steel that Superman was the first. He had to say something, and he said what he felt. And at that time, I made kind of suggestions that it was very possible we could see Snyder getting more and more unhappy and eventually leaving the project. So that's the first reason why I think there might be some problems ahead. Number two is that I don't believe the studio was really happy with the final results of Man of Steel. I think that they've made overtures. They have made comments that it performed better than they thought. It performs really well overseas. They were really happy with it. Studio execs who were seeing the movie before it was released were making remarks that it was great, that it was fantastic, that everybody was going to love it. But then it came out and everybody didn't love it. And it was critically panned in most circles. And most fans on Rotten Tomatoes and other sites like that were not happy with it. Critics were using cute little trite phrases like never gets off the ground, barely soars, doesn't take off, not so super, these types of things. And it was clear that that critical response and some of the fan response kept some people away that might have seen it. A lot of people didn't see it a second time, which I think is required for these superhero movies to do really, really well. But clearly a lot of people did see it a second time, and a lot of people saw it overseas, and it did really well. And it did better than Batman Begins, which is the studio's baby. They love Nolan. They love what he'd done. They love it so much that they brought Nolan back to kind of be an overseer, an executive producer, a producer. They brought Goyer back, who wrote the Dark Knight trilogy, and they wanted him to do this one. They kind of wanted him to do a somewhat like a Dark Knight treatment of the Man of Steel. I think it was brighter and more hopeful. A lot of fans feel like it was too dark and too depressing to be a Superman movie. But it's clear to me with all the shakeup that the studio really wasn't that happy, and they want to make sure that they're extra happy with Man of Steel 2 or whatever it is that it becomes. It's looking more and more to me like it's going to be a World's Finest or a Trinity or a Justice League prequel or something along those lines, which could be okay if those characters play a lesser role than Superman does. But number three reason why I think there are issues is they go out and they hire Affleck. We heard about this months ago, and I have made it clear that I think Affleck is a great choice to play an older Batman, and I think he'll do a fine job depending on what the script is and what's going to happen. The issue now that I'm bringing up is they hire Affleck, who is mostly known for his directing work these days. He was never really as successful as an actor as it seemed like he was going to be. Years and years ago, he seemed to be the next big thing. He was going to be this, people touted him as being this great Hollywood presence, and he just wasn't. Movies he was in flopped. Some were successful, but he really wasn't that successful as an actor. His biggest success came when he was a co-writer on Good Will Hunting, and then he did some movies where he was an actor, and a lot of them got panned. Then he did Daredevil, which a lot of people weren't happy with and didn't make a whole lot of money. And after he did Daredevil, he said he was never going to be a superhero again. He had no interest, he had no desire, and he had no intention of ever playing another superhero. Yet now here he is, supposedly playing Batman in a supposed Man of Steel sequel, even though it looks like it might not really be a Man of Steel sequel. And all of this is supposition on my part. It's not even rumor. It hasn't even come out anywhere else. These are just my thoughts based on what's been happening. And the other thing is that Affleck is much too old to be playing Batman. Now, I realize they've said, well, we've cast him as an older, wiser Batman, a seasoned crime fighter who was doing it long ago before Superman arrived. Now, the problem with that is other remarks were made by the creators, Zack Snyder and everyone, that Superman was the first. There was no one else before him. Now, in retrospect, after the studio has forced his hand and forced him to include Batman in this movie, he's saying, well, what we meant by that was Superman was the first really public hero. He was the first really popular hero. He was the first super being that we witnessed. But that isn't what they said. What they said was he was the first superhero to be in operation that people knew about. Now, we don't know what it's going to be in the movie. Maybe no one ever met Batman. Maybe no one ever saw Batman. Maybe he really is that dark knight in the shadows that no one ever saw, that he kind of is supposed to be. And he was never in the paper, and no one ever knew him except Gordon and a few police that he worked with. And maybe he is this suspicious, mysterious character that's an urban legend that nobody really believes exists. So that's possible, but it still means there was a superhero before Superman. And the truth is, Superman and Batman are supposed to be contemporaries. Superman is not supposed to be taught by Batman. He's not supposed to be trained by Batman. He's not supposed to learn from Batman. In general, they learn from each other as a comrade thing, where one does, they get things from each other in that manner, but he's not supposed to be a trainer of Superman. And some plot leaks have come out, rumored plot leaks about supposedly what the script is. And in that, it says that Batman's working with the government to curtail Superman and make sure he doesn't destroy another city. Now, the problem with that is he didn't destroy a city. Parts of Metropolis were destroyed during a battle with a superhuman race that needed to be stopped at all costs, or they were going to obliterate everyone and everything. So yeah, some buildings got destroyed, and undoubtedly some people were injured and died. That would happen in a world invasion where the invading force intended to eradicate everybody. Superman did what he needed to do, and at the same time, he worked with the army to do it. And he has a relationship with the General Swanwick, and he has a relationship with the army officers, and they trusted him, and they worked together to save the world and save the city. Albeit at the expense of some destruction and some death, which would happen in any war, and Superman didn't purposely bring this war upon anybody. General Zod and crew attacked, and they needed to be stopped. So yes, there was some damage. But that plot point that was supposedly leaked doesn't make a lot of sense in the world of Man of Steel. In Man of Steel, he was a hero. People loved that he was a hero. People would be awed by him. And in any situation where an otherworldly being came down, where an alien appeared, there would be people who were terrified, there would be people who were thrilled, and there would be people in the middle who were just kind of intrigued to find out what was going to happen and what this alien race meant. But he certainly isn't an enemy of the state at the end of Man of Steel. At the end of the movie, supposedly, the plots points that have leaked, Superman was going to be in exile, and Batman was going to start the Justice League. They're contemporaries. They're supposed to start the Justice League together. Superman is supposed to be one of the big leaders in the Justice League, and it could be Batman's idea. He could start it because he has the money and the resources and that kind of thing, but Superman needs to be there, and it would be very, very strange for them to do that. But they could change it all around based on some of these ideas I have, and if Snyder does in fact depart from the project, which is totally coming from me and just a thought that I have based on what I've been seeing. The fourth reason I think there could be issues is, after they hire Affleck, a few weeks or months later, they announced that Affleck's writer from Argo, Chris Terrio, was coming on board Man of Steel 2, or Batman v Superman, or the Batman Superman Project, or whatever you want to call it, or whatever it's actually going to be. Chris Terrio is an award-winning writer who wrote Argo. Argo was a great movie. Ben Affleck's a great director now. Why him? Why did they bring in a writer when they were so happy with Goyer during the Batman trilogy? It seems to me that Batman is just their baby and they're happy with whatever. And the other thing that always confounded me is that Nolan and Goyer were given full reign, seemingly, unless I missed something, and I don't follow the Batman developments on film as much as I follow Superman. I don't remember Nolan ever being at odds with the studio. Not that it's really been announced Snyder is either, but he made it clear he's not happy. Nolan was given carte blanche. Change whatever you want, do whatever you want, use the characters however you want. And many fans are happy with what he did, and many fans think that it's the purest form of Batman we've seen on screen. But things like Catwoman never being referred to as Catwoman, the cat burglar they talk about, things like Bane not being powered by Venom, things like Ra's al Ghul not having Lazarus pits that bring him back to life, things like that, because Nolan believes that too many comic book ideas in a movie make it not realistic enough. But the problem is you're making a fantasy movie, you're making a science fiction movie, you're making a superhero movie, you're making a comic book movie, and it always bothered me that he would say things like the Penguin, Killer Croc, those characters don't really fit into my universe. And I understand that filmmakers and writers and creators want to kind of put their own stamp on something, but a lot of fans and a lot of people worldwide will say, well, this isn't your thing. You don't have a right to put your stamp on it or change it or do what you want just because you want to. These are revered characters that we all love. They're legendary characters that we want to see brought to life in an authentic way, in a way that we feel is true to their roots. That's never going to happen where it pleases everybody. Some things are going to be changed, like with Man of Steel. I love the new origin. I love things that were changed and added. Were there things I wouldn't have done? Were there things I would have changed? Of course. You're not going to please everyone, and not everything is always going to work for everybody to everyone's satisfaction. But overall, I think it's the best live-action Superman movie we've ever seen, and I would hate to see it kind of thrown out the window like Superman Returns was, even though the word still is that the cast from that film is still hired and is still contracted to do movies and is still going to do movies moving forward if everything changes and everything gets thrown out the window and the movie is a Batman movie and Batman's the hero and Superman is in exile and kind of the villain. And that's not where we left off in Man of Steel. So to end up there is very different from the feeling that most fans had that we were going to get going forward. And the fifth reason that I think there might be an issue is, of course, the most recent development, and that is that there's going to be a 10-month delay in the movie. They were in a rush to get this done. They were in a rush to catch up to Marvel and catch up to the Avengers, which is never going to happen in this fashion. But this movie may be very successful. It may be close to the success of Avengers or Iron Man 3. It may even surpass it. Who knows? Maybe everybody is clamoring to see Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman together on the same screen, and maybe that will make it surpass all other movies. And if it does, that would be great for DC. And that, of course, is obviously what any studio would want. And to a certain extent, it's what I would want as well. I would like to see all these characters kind of built up. Not necessarily first, and you can go about it in reverse order. But the problem is, that's not really what DC is doing either. Instead, they're really just rushing to get something out there that might be able to compete with where Marvel is after 10 years of trying, and 10 years of being successful, and 10 years of being a fan base, building a fan base. And I've already talked about this, so I don't need to go into it any further, but they were in such a rush to get it out there. They announced July 2015, it's coming out, Batman's going to be in it. Then Wonder Woman was going to be in it. Then there were rumors that Green Lantern was going to be in it, and other heroes were going to be in it, and maybe Lex Luthor's going to be in it, and rumor, and nothing really getting done. And now we're on a 10-month delay. And we've all read that any kind of a delay would push it from its July start, which would put it into August or September, and you can't release a big comic book movie then, so it would have to be at least a 10-month delay anyway. And okay, I understand that that's the case, but now with a delay, and they say it's because the creators need more time to realize their vision, which could also be a way of saying, we don't know what the hell we're doing, we're confused, we don't have a script we really want to work with, we brought in other guys to fix it, we got too much going on, we got too many characters, we don't know if we want this to be a Man of Steel sequel, we're not that happy with Man of Steel, we don't know if we want it to be Justice League, we don't know what we want it to be, and we're all over the place, and the script is everywhere, and we just don't have the time we need to fix it, so we need another year to do it. Which is ironic because Goyer said a few months ago that the film was further along than most people think, and now it seems like we're nowhere. And maybe we are somewhere. Maybe the film does really need that kind of time. It seems to me, bringing in new writer when they were so happy with Goyer before, and bringing in Affleck, that it's very possible that Affleck had some other deals in place. In order to agree to play a superhero again, that he would direct sometime in the future. There was speculation, and I said this myself, that he's probably going to be either approached or has already been offered the eventual Justice League film when we get there. Or maybe there was talk about him doing Man of Steel 2, and is it possible they're doing everything they can to get rid of Snyder and install Ben Affleck? And if they do that, will that change the character of Superman that we saw? And based on some of the plot leaks that have come out, it certainly will, because that's not the story we saw at all. It's not the character we saw at all. And now we've got an older, wiser Batman who presumably is working with the government to stop Superman in a UN-type situation. I believe all those are made-up rumors about possible script leaks, but who knows what they're doing? And of course, with all these issues, these 5 that I have given you, I'm very concerned. And the only reason I bring it up is because I like what they did with Man of Steel, even if there are some things that I may have changed. And it made more money than Batman Begins. In the end, Batman Begins might have taken in more, or might be around the even mark with Man of Steel, because it cost less to make Batman Begins. So Man of Steel needed to sell more tickets in order to make back the money and make more money. But in the end, that still means that Man of Steel sold more tickets. So there was a lot of interest. People were very excited. The film kind of did what it needed to do in introducing Superman, bringing him back to the world, making people excited about seeing Superman on screen again. And for some reason, it has seemed increasingly more clear to me over time that Warner Brothers still isn't happy enough with what it did, and that they're still enamored with Batman. And even though the Nolan franchise is done, maybe there's other deals going on in the background there. Maybe, who knows what's going on. Obviously, it would make them all squeal with glee if Nolan would come back and direct and do more Batman stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of that could mean bad things for our Man of Steel. Does that mean we'd never see another Superman movie? No, but Hollywood and Warner Brothers has tried too many times over the last 10 years to bring Superman back to the screen in an acceptable way that audiences loved. Man of Steel was close enough. It did enough business, I think, way more business than it needed to do, although Superman Returns was successful monetarily as well, and also made more money than Batman Begins. But they weren't happy with that. They scrapped it. Everybody got fired, and nothing was ever done again. I just don't want to see that happen again. So when I go on message boards and I see someone suggesting, does anyone have thoughts that Snyder might be leaving this project? And then people going, yay, finally, get Snyder out of there. That's the best thing that could happen. I feel like they're either really not Superman fans, or they hate Snyder so much that they would be willing to risk the possibility that we may not see any more Superman films. Will Superman be involved going forward? Who knows? If that happens, though, I think it could be 20, 30 years before we see another reboot. And do we want another reboot? I mean, we've had it. A lot of people complain that we already saw Superman's origin. In my mind, it's still been 30 years since those movies came out. So it was time. There are new people, new kids, young people seeing movies that didn't see those movies, that don't necessarily know the Superman origin. Smallville is old at this point. Younger kids that have not watched Smallville, were not interested in Superman, needed to see a new big screen origin, and it was done really, really well. Some things in the movie done not to everyone's satisfaction, but that's always going to be the case. You can't please everyone completely all of the time. I'm just concerned. I'm worried. I hope that I'm wrong in a lot of ways, and if I am right on any of these things, I hope that it still means we move forward with the Man of Steel shared universe, and we don't suddenly get a Batman is better than everybody movie and Superman's exiled somewhere and it's horrible. Thanks for watching, everybody, and remember, sometimes it helps to look up in the sky.